All right. Hey, I am really excited about this next video. Thank you for listening. Brian Boteller with the Gospel Rescue Mission here again. We are on video number 3, and our topic today is once an addict, always an addict. And boy, we're going to get into some meaty stuff that I think is challenging. We're going to certainly buck some of the current language that's out there, and I'll bet you that I pull some heartstrings along the way in our conversation. If we do, would you be so kind as to put some comments? Let us know, and go ahead and feel free to share your opinions on things as well in there if I differ from you in some way, because this is an important conversation. It's an important way to understand how the Christian community and looks at addiction and addiction recovery, which is a big component in how we help homelessness. With no further ado, here's video number 3, Once an Addict.
We want, as you were saying, to become that new creation in Christ, because the way I see it is people come into our programs, they could be actively using. The moment they come and quit using, they become ex-addicts, and over time and consistency, they become this new creation in Christ. Whereas society, if someone back in their past 20 years ago was an addict, once an addict, always an addict.
Right.
I do not believe that for a moment.
Just going to go there. I'm so glad you and I think so much alike. Yes.
Yeah.
Keep going.
Well, and it's like, and I tell my guys that all the time. I was like, don't let society label you as an addict or as an adulterer, or as, even had guys in that were murderers or whatever.
Felons, yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
So what? That's your past. Society wants to, they want to label you with all that. But no, over this time and consistency, and you can have your last drink or your last shot or whatever it is, and you become this new creation in Christ, and you can have victory over all of that. Oh. That's the good news. And it's not only, it's the great news in the sense that, a lot of these other more, for lack of a better term, secular programs, they say, you're an addict, you'll always be an addict, you're just not an active addict or whatever. Yeah. And to me, that just drives me nuts. It's like, let's give them some hope of knowing that someday they can have victory over this.
To me, our culture is so in need of understanding what does forgiveness mean, and what does change mean. You watch people that are, you watch this circus going on in our political world where they're taking guys, they're going back through their high school yearbook, guys in their 50s and 60s, going back through their high school yearbook to dig up some kind of trash on them, and then shut them down today because of something they did then. And I'm thinking, nobody stands up to that standard. Nobody, absolutely nobody. And what you really need is not to crush everybody, not to cancel everybody that's ever made a mistake. What you want to do is see change. And we get heat here because sometimes I have, probably at any given point in time, I have somewhere around 10% of my resident population in the men's house anyways, and sometimes even in the women's house where I've got registered sex offenders. And, I always hesitate bringing that up because then everybody wants to know who and where and blah, blah, blah. And they get all panicky and everything in there. How could you let those people in there? And I go, man, let me tell you something. First of all, there is nobody on the planet that you want more to change than a sex offender. Absolutely. Right? You want them to change. You want them to have a different life. You want them to recognize the error of their ways, to regret it, to try and make things right in any way they can, and to be a different person moving forward, to change those things. But there is this idea that they can just never change. And despite the fact that all the recidivism rates show that they can change, in fact, that they're better at it than most felons if given the opportunity. And so there's so much information out there that says, man, these guys don't, and I'm with you. I hate sitting in an AA meeting or an NA meeting, and I sit in there listening because I'm supporting somebody that's there, and I'm listening to them, and somebody goes, "Hi, my name's Bob." Everybody goes, "Hi, Bob. Today I'm getting my my 25-year pen. I'm an alcoholic and an addict, and here's my 25-year sobriety pen. And to me, it's just like, that record scratch, and I'm like, wait a minute, what? You haven't been doing this for 25 years? And you're still calling yourself an addict and an alcoholic and an addict or whatever. I'm going, no, I'm sorry, but you no longer meet that definition anymore. You're a changed man.
Absolutely.
And shouldn't that be? I mean, if we were talking about women changing in prostitution, for leaving prostitution behind, the culture would find a sympathetic, there's a sympathy bone there, and they would go, oh, they shouldn't have to wear a scarlet letter. These people, these ladies, they may have done these things, and they start to justify their reasons for why they did it. They justify all the bad, by all the bad circumstances they had. They tell this narrative. They'd automatically fill in all those gaps, but they can't do it for a felon, and they can't do it certainly not a male sex offender, right. Because being a prostitute is a sex offense. It's a crime, and it should be, right. and so, but that doesn't mean that people can't change. And that's the thing. This is the thing that I think is unique to Christian organizations and such good news. Why I'm excited to hear about somebody going to U-Turn for Christ or coming into the Gospel Rescue Mission who's, they got an ugly past. And I'm with you. I've had murderers in here. I've had people that spent, 2 decades in prison for crimes they committed. And they come in here and they are so stunned that we just love on them, that we treat them well. I mean, we're rigorous. I mean, it's not a sit down kind of a program, I mean, you are going to get a life of your own. It will be independent. When you leave here, you're going to leave into independence. Because I'm not interested, because circling back around to, you had talked about when somebody comes into the hospital because of a cut on their arm or something like that. We're like the ER, and the way I know that if I'm an ER doctor that I'm doing my job is if I'm sending the patient out in better condition than they came in. And I really need to get them stable and on their way toward healing, and get the right people around them, the right circle of things that may include that I get them in touch with a counselor or some kind of a service provider or several of them in the community or whatever, but all those things have to come together to make that person successful. And included in that is a story, a biblical worldview that I need to get them exposed to hear that you're more than just some kind of meat machine, that seems to be like the cultural narrative in so many ways. You're just this you're just random activity, random electronic pulses and stuff going through stardust that's all glommed together. And because at that point in time, if they believe that about themselves, then there is nothing wrong or right about what they do. There's no moral compass to be had. This is just a series of choices. And even those aren't even your choices. You're just following whatever the impulses that are flowing through your system.
Yeah, you're predisposed to them. And that's another thing, that I think is unique to Christian organizations. And I would almost assume that you would agree with what I'm about to say is society has kind of taken personal responsibility away from individuals, right? So, addiction is a disease.
Right.
Which is, to me, the biggest bunch of hogwash there is. No, addiction is a choice that... a series of bad choices that led them to a place where, that they're addicted to whatever it is. And so by telling them it's a disease, it's not their fault.
Right.
They have no personal responsibility. And so it's that same mindset that we're talking about here with homelessness or whatever. It's not, we don't hold them to an account for their personal responsibility. If we don't it's like a child. If we don't train them up in the way they should go, and we don't hold them responsible for it, then they're never going to be able to make appropriate decisions.
Well, if I have a disease, then it's just my diagnosis. If this is, and I've talked to numerous guys who come in and go, well, I'm an addict. And you go, well, okay, but stop. And they go, well, but I come from a long line of addicts. My father was an addict. My grandfather was an addict and everything. I go, great. So stop.
Yeah.
And they go, no, you don't understand. It's in my DNA. I was born this way. And I go, well, now there's some things that we could agree on in some of that. I agree that you were born with a lot of these things, but that doesn't mean that, you don't have to stay the way you were born at every point and turn. And then, I go, don't be resigned. I hear this a lot especially with mental health diagnosis. It's like, oh, I have depression. And I go, well, how did you get that? Let me guess. You touched a doorknob that somebody else that had depression touched, and they weren't wearing a mask at the time, and you caught their depression, right?
Right.
Or you got your alcoholism. You gave a hug and shared a coffee mug with somebody who had a bad case of the alcoholics, right? And when you talk about it like that, they look and anybody who's, I'm telling you, there's probably counselors who've been trained in kind of non-Christian, more secular counseling. They're probably grinding their teeth at us right now going, oh no, it's a disease. And there are people who are committed to their drunkenness, to their substance abuse, who are also going, you can't tell me it's not a disease, because to believe that means that I'm on the hook for the choices that I make. And right now, if I can believe it's a disease, then it's not I can't help it. It's just what I do. And I listen to so many guys that have been kind of schooled in that kind of counseling, not counselors, but people who've been counseled for long periods of time with that kind of therapy. And they're just as stuck in it as they ever were. And they just go, oh, no, it's part of my cycle. It's what I do. I relapse every, so often and I can't help it and everything. And I go, man, what a hopeless, miserable way to imagine the world works, and I'm like, man, what if I told you that you actually could just stop doing that? That you don't have to listen to your DNA. You don't have to listen to, you don't have to listen to any of that stuff. And that's even assuming that it's even in your DNA, because we've never figured out, they might go, well, yeah, see, we studied all these alcoholics and they have DNA evidence of, these same kind of switches go on in their DNA. And you go, yeah, but is it a cause or a symptom?
Well, that's just it. And that's what I was going to say. And let's say for the sake of argument, we say somebody is predisposed to alcoholism.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean they have to drink. That doesn't mean that because they are predisposed to it, that if they would have never cracked that first bottle open, that they would have ever became an alcoholic. There's still a choice that led them down this path. And somebody who is predisposed to it should even be that much more on guard as far as making sure they don't go down that road. If you've seen your dad and your mom and your grandpa and your brothers were all alcoholics, and you knowing that, and you decided to take that first drink out of rebellion or whatever it is, you started a chain of events that led to where you are. So regardless if they want to call it a disease or you're predisposed, you still have responsibility in the sense that you started the chain of events. And if you would have never taken that first drink that you knew you were predisposed to, then, that would be like, take any highly addictive substance. If someone says, well, I have the disease of heroin addiction. Right. Well, it's a highly addictive substance and you tried it for recreation and now you've lost everything because of it. What'd you expect? And
here's the thing that they never seem to be able to answer, and I don't get this, is like, okay, so let's work with heroin. So the heroin addicts, if what we're talking about is some kind of a chemical hook that's tied to your DNA or, tied or not tied just because of the power of the chemistry alone, if that's what it was, then how come everybody that goes in and has, hip replacement surgery doesn't walk out heroin addicts because they were on morphine for the pain. And morphine's like the purest form of opiate that we've got, and one of them anyways. And so why don't they come out instantly chemically hooked? But they don't.
No.
They don't. Now, some of them may later on, start becoming abusers of opiates if in their pills or something like that later on. But even then, it's a very, very small percentage. And when you look at that, you go, and were there other circumstances that led to that? You go, well, did they come home to a bad home life? Did they come home with bad relational situation? I bet you, the studies, and these are the things that there's not enough studies to get all the details in, but there's enough to tell us that there's more than just raw chemistry going on here.
Absolutely. And anecdotally, over the years of seeing exactly what you're saying, like for instance, when I broke my hip, having dealt with so many people who were addicted to opiates or whatever, I couldn't wait to get off the pain medication because the more you use it, the more chance there is of becoming addicted to any substance,
Sure.
And so for me, mentally, I knew as soon as I can somewhat bear the pain, I was off of all the opiates, didn't want a part of it. In fact, I wouldn't even keep them in my house. First thing I did was, as soon as I got to the point where I could survive on Tylenol, those opiates were out of the house, type of thing. And so if I'm someone who didn't have an issue with opiates, was going to that extreme to make sure, that there was no chance that I could ever get addicted or have issues with them, how much more so should we hold someone accountable who does have an active addiction to it? How much more accountability should we have with that person? How much more higher standards should we hold them to, knowing that they're in an active struggle with it? So to me, all those arguments and all the negatives people say, for instance, about, the Gospel Rescue Mission or U-Turn because we're too stringent and we require these things. Well, we require it because it's it's necessary to transition them from active addiction to overcoming. And
the thing is, that not just in theory, and this is the difference between, this is the difference with you and I between us and so many other. We're not just talking. I mean, the average armchair quarterback that's driving in their car right now, listening to this on our podcast or something, that's sitting there going, no, they need this or they need that, and you go, well, how do you know? Well, because I knew somebody that was addicted, or I have a friend that's, I got a family member that's addicted or whatever. Maybe for me, I had to come over. You're talking about an experience. How long have you been doing this kind of work?
I've been doing
personally
about 12. I founded U-Turn here in Oregon about 13 years ago.
Okay, so you and I have been really close to about the same time frame in our working, personally at this level, and of those, I mean, how many people would you say you've seen? Just a rough guess. Actually walk away from bad choices to, commitments to drunkenness and substance abuse. How many people have you seen walk away from that?
Oh, there's been hundreds. It can be done. And the thing that I love, and I think one of the most powerful parts of that is not hearing about, the power of God in my life, someone who never really had an active addiction.
Sure.
But raising up men who have been successful, who helped me run the program to be able to say, you know what, I once was you. I once struggled with the same things you're struggling with, and you can. I'm proof that it is possible. That kind of testimony and that kind of witness to someone who's struggling, saying, I had that same heroin addiction that you had, and I've been clean, and I have my own company, and I have all these different things, now, that just seem impossible in that moment, that peer counseling, that peer
For sure.
is so powerful. And there's so many out there. So that's what I
that's
think
the part too. For me, I say the exact same thing. I'm like, I always try and get guys, anytime, and a lot of them are reticent to come on camera and or sit behind a microphone, but I'm always kind of going, hey, but let me tell you, your testimony means more than mine in many ways. And, mine, I can sit there and say, we're a great organization. We do great work. I'm paid to say that kind of stuff. You're paid to say that stuff. You believe in it. And I believe in it. But when I have, and I, when we talk about hundreds of people, I mean, literally hundreds and hundreds of men and women who've come through our program, who have circled back around to do exactly that, who've come back around and said, you know what, maybe Brian's never been addicted to, alcohol or drugs or whatever. He's still a jerk, but he's not been addicted in those ways or whatever. But I was, and I followed what Brian's saying. I followed what Kevin is saying, and because of that, I was able to get away from this stuff. I was able to become, to find a normal life again. I was able to re-enter society. I had broken relationships that are now healed. I remember one time. And this was right after I first started, there was a guy that had come into the Gospel Rescue Mission when we were in our old location at 8th and East Street. And he come in, he was drinking hard. He'd come in, he was really tore up. I think he had just gotten out of jail. His wife had called, he had violated a restraining order or something along those lines. He'd lost his wife and kids basically because of his drinking problem. And I walked with this guy. We let him in. He was really broken. And, we let him in, and he was one of the early successes in my time here. He did really well. He ended up finding work. He ended up getting out and he ended up working with his in his church, connecting with a church where again a lot of people underestimate the power of the counseling that's available in a church alone. I mean that doesn't cost anything to the Oregon Health Plan, or doesn't cost anything to an insurance company. That churches are just willing to come in and give good, wise counsel and walk alongside people. And it's not always, not all churches give great counsel, but there are some that do really, really well. And anyways, it was like about a year later, and I'm walking with my wife and kids at Boatnik down here, big outdoor event here in Grants Pass, and I'm out there in this big carnival atmosphere and everything, and I see this guy, and I can't even remember his name. But he comes running. I hear him from a distance, Brian, and he comes over and I'm like, hey, I recognize his face, and so I'm just kind of like, hey, brother, how you doing? And I'm just trying to play it off, and he goes, do you remember me? And I said, I do. I said, I do remember you. And he says, remember how I had lost everything because of my drinking and everything like that? And I said, yeah. He said, man, you helped me so much. He said, I've not taken, since the day that I walked in that Gospel Rescue Mission, I've not drank anything. And he said, and check this out. He says, come here, let me introduce you to my wife and kids. And they had been restored, and they were just having fun, taking their kids out to a carnival and everything. And he and I are just standing there in the middle of Boatnik, just bawling as we're hugging each other and cheering each other on, and it's those kinds of experiences that you just never get past. You're like, this thing works.
Well, it does. And not only that, if there was never another success story other than that guy and his restored family and those kids being raised up, everything that the Gospel Rescue Mission here in Grants Pass has ever done is worth it. Yeah. And then you multiply that times hundreds, and the ripple effect that's going to have for all of the kids involved and all the, parents and everything else, that 100 becomes thousands that are healed, and then even more that never end up in that lifestyle.
Maybe his kids never end up, starting to take up drinking and never end up homelessness as a result and all that stuff.
Exactly.
Maybe his wife, now their marriage is healed, and so she doesn't just bounce into another abusive relationship, but they actually have a whole and happy marriage because of that. All kinds of things, and you really can literally break the cycle that is generations. I mean, here at the mission, we've had 3 generations under the same roof. We've had grandma, daughter, and grandkids in the same house, at the same time, and we've had it way more than once, and so you see this kind of stuff, this cycle that's just constantly self-perpetuating. They're repeating behavior that they were taught by parents who were taught that by their parents and everything. And so we're here going, no, you got to do something different, and it's going to feel hard because it's very different from what you were doing. But it's in reality, here's what I know, it's not that hard. See, somehow you and I, and probably 95% at least of everybody listening to this, does all of our rules every single day without fail, and does it like it's just second nature to them. They get up on time. They eat their meals on time. They show up punctually to things that they say they're going to do. They contribute to their household, the well-being of their household. They clean up after themselves. They do all those kinds of things. They contribute to their community, whether it's either in working and paying taxes or volunteering and doing other good things around the community. There's all these things that take place. They don't abuse drugs and alcohol and tobacco, and those that use things that are legal can afford to do so. It's okay because they're doing it in a way that's not excessive, and they're doing it in a way that's within their budget. And so in those things, it's like, okay, they're not going to run themselves out on the street and everything. And all of these things happen every single day, all day in, day out, and that's what makes it work. That's part of the magic in the whole thing. All right, and here we are again. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to us. We are really trying to build this YouTube channel up, and I hope that you forgive me for my nervousness and the kind of the awkwardness of some of the things I say. I'm really trying to get this thing rolling here, and I think that it's conversations. These are the conversations that I find really compelling as we sit and visit with other professionals in the field, other people in our community, and certainly with the homeless people that we work with every single day here at the Gospel Rescue Mission. If this struck a chord with you, would you please subscribe? Maybe share this video on your Facebook page. Leave some comments, and again, maybe there's things in organizations that are working in addiction recovery in your local area that just deserve a shout out, and maybe you can put their link below here. Remember, you can find us at grantspassmission.org. Obviously, go to the link below for learning more about U-Turn for Christ. Kevin Darr is a wealth of information, and we love talking together, and looking forward to tomorrow's video, or the next video, I guess. And again, stay tuned. Thank you so much. God bless you, and have a good day.